Greetings, metalheads. Welcome to another edition of the Friday 13th YouTube channel. Today I've got a fantastic interview for you to check out. This is with Christian power metal band Deliverance. Now, these guys have been around since the 80s. They've brought some fantastic albums. So I'm going to be talking to vocalist Jimmy P. Brown. Jimmy, thank you for doing this interview, brother. God bless. This is a great interview, folks. Please check it out. You can share on social media, Facebook, or wherever. Leave comments and thumbs up. Thanks for watching, metalheads. God bless. Stay metal. Hey, Jimmy.
Hey, bud. Can you hear me?
Yeah, how are you doing?
Good, man. How are you, bud?
Good, man. Good to see you again, brother.
But gosh, last time I remember seeing you was backstage over at HOA.
Yeah, 2 years ago, I believe.
Yeah, man, 2019. Actually, no, that was 2019, brother. That's going on 4-5 years. Yeah.
So, Jimmy, when did you guys actually form? How did you, in the first early stages, was it in high school? How did it come about?
I was 15, brother.
Right.
I was 15 when it all began, 1985, and just took an ad out like every other band at that time used. We have a rag out in LA called The Recycler, and just took an ad out and met Chris Hyde, who was our first drummer, and then Manny Morales, who's still our present bass player, and Larry Farkas, who later went on to join Vengeance. And that's how we started, man. I had already written like 5 or 6 songs, and we were kind of doing more like a Sabbath, Maiden kind of thing when we first started. But I kept telling them about this band I'd grown up seeing and named Slayer. And I think we need to go more on that edge. And of course, obviously, because Hell Awaits was already out. So I was really into the Hell Awaits record. And
did you try to recall that album, Christian Awaits? Or Heaven? Did you try to recall that album, Heaven Awaits?
Oh, Heaven Awaits! How interesting that would have been, especially with that crazy intro, huh? With all the evil sounds. Although I kind of did with the song "Awake" on the first album. I told Bill Matoyer, who produced Hell Awaits.
Yeah, I know Bill. Yeah,
our first album. I told him I want a Hell Awaits vibe on that song "Awake." So come up with some crazy evil sounding intro, and I think it worked. Wasn't as cool as Hell Awaits, but it was still cool.
Okay, so you hooked up with those guys.
We started, and we've been doing our thing ever since.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, what was your first demo? What songs were appeared on the first demo that might have made the first album, or was it all completely songs that didn't make it?
No. The first demo was called "Greeting of Death," and "Victory," "No Time," and "Greeting of Death," and all those were on there. And I don't think the only one or JIG was on there, but I don't think the song "Speckled Bird" appeared on anything else other than that demo, that little country ditty that we did. And that was just a fun song we used to play live, so that's why I put it on the demo. But otherwise, no, it was all those songs made it on a record sooner or later, if not the first album for sure.
So was you taken very serious back in the day? Because a lot of people didn't take Christian metal very serious. I mean, Styrper, the godfathers of Christian metal, as we all know.
Yes.
Did people take you serious back then?
Well, what was cool is we were playing with bands. You mentioned Overkill. We played with Overkill. We played with Dark Angel. We played with Armored Saint. That's where we were. We didn't even know necessarily of a Christian music scene. We were playing all the Hollywood clubs with these other bands, and then there was a club that we played a lot called the Waters Club, and that's where we hooked up with Dark Angel and Gene Hoglan.
Yeah, I'm good friends with Gene. He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah, well, Gene was a big fan of Deliverance, man. He'd come to a lot of our shows, and he was always a big supporter because they didn't care what we stood for because we didn't shove it down everybody's throats. We went and did our thing. And but man, I mean, I remember when we played a show with the Viking, and
they were a good band, Man of Straw and Do or Die albums.
Yeah, Man of Straw is a great album, man.
I think the first album, Do or Die, was really, really high. It was really intense.
Yeah, it was. Well, we played a lot with them, and those guys actually loved us, Brett Erickson, and I remember they were they were watching me play and my rhythm style, and they went over and they were like, man, them and the guitar player for Dark Angel, they were like, dude, you got a wrist from hell, dude. You're just all over it. And they're like, oh wait, a wrist from heaven.
So,
Like,
so,
dude, you don't have to change it. It's all good.
so who was the guitarist in Dark Angel? Was it Eric or Jim?
It was Eric. Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember that now. Yeah. And then
Eric
there was
Mayer.
Brett from Viking. Brett, and then I always forget the lead singer's name. I think his name was Ron.
Ron
But
Reinhardt. Ron Reinhardt.
that's the singer for DA or for Dark Angel, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, Don Dottie was the original singer.
Right, right, right. That's good stuff, man. I mean, I loved playing with those guys because it really legitimized what we were doing and what we were trying to do. And they respected us because they thought we were legit. So it was when we started playing with Christian bands at Christian festivals that things kind of shifted and started changing. All of a sudden, we were the Christian alternative to Metallica or Christian alternative to Slayer. I never heard the Metallica in our music, to be honest with you. They didn't, you know, to me, we always sounded like Slayer-ish meets Queensryche, you know, so.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with Overkill as well.
And Overkill. But I never heard like the Metallica thing. I mean, I guess the crunch guitars and maybe a lot of the rhythm style, because I do like James Hetfield's rhythm style. I'm just not a big fan of their music.
Yeah.
I thought Ride the Lightning was a pretty killer album, you know. And Battery, probably one of the baddest riffs ever written. But you know, as far as the rest of the stuff, it sounds kind of old school cliche, but they kind of got a little too popular for my taste after a while.
Yeah.
Once they got really popular, I didn't like them anymore.
I mean, you were on about Viking. Were they a Christian band? Because they had some sort of beliefs, didn't they, with the two?
They weren't. They weren't a Christian band, but two of the guys ended up becoming believers.
Is that the two brothers? Was that the two brothers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when they became believers, then like Man of Straw, you definitely saw the lyrical content change. But no, the whole time that we knew them, they weren't Christians.
So how many demos did you do before you got your first record deal with Intense?
We did two. One officially that we would like sell at our shows, the Greeting of Death demo. And then we did another one called After Greetings, but it was terrible. It was like really badly recorded. And I had just bought my first 4-track recorder and I was trying to record us, and it just turned out really awful. So that one we would just throw out at concerts. We would just throw them in the audience, you know, give them away. We didn't
copying off Stryper with the Bibles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it made more sense for me to throw tapes than Bibles, because Bibles, I remember going to a Stryper show, and you know, I love what I like to say, the written word. I mean, I have a book collection. I'm always reading. I'm just reading. So no matter what, poetry, philosophy, anything. And so whenever I see them trampled or torn or ripped apart, I just get something. I'm like, gosh, you know, as Christians believe this to be the holy word of God, and they're throwing them out there. And I remember walking the floor after a Stryper show and just seeing all these Bibles trampled on and torn up. And I'm like, wow, I don't like the idea of this, you know. Even if they were throwing, you know, copies of The Raven from Edgar Allan Poe, I still would not like to see any type of literature treated like that, you know. So I was never into that.
So getting back then, Jimmy, I mean, as a singer and guitarist, who's your influences as a singer, and who's your influences as a guitar player? And did you have any members of your family that were influenced, played instruments or vocals before you got involved?
My brother was in a band. He was in actually a few bands. He's 9 years my senior. So I grew up seeing him and listening to his band practice at the house. And when I asked him to teach me guitar, he didn't really teach me. He wrote out the notes and said, here, play these 7 chords or 6 chords or whatever. So I just kind of taught myself. So I'd say guitar wise, you know, I grew up playing to I grew up playing a lot to Eddie Van Halen. You know, especially Van Halen 1. Just loved his guitar playing, and not the solos. I was more of a fan of Eddie's rhythm playing, because you could tell Eddie's just a monster rhythm player, and I think nobody really pays that much attention to that. And then I love Tony Iommi. So he was a big influence, you know, just that beautiful dark you know, sinister sound, you know. God, it was such a great vibe. And then, believe it or not, Neil Young was a big influence on me, man. That Rust Never Sleeps album. Um, he's just got a really grotesque guitar sound, and I gravitated towards it because it was just gross. And then, of course, Dave Murray was a big influence too from Iron Maiden. I just loved them. The first time I heard Maiden, I was just floored. You know, it was the Purgatory EP, and then got Killers, and was just I was so crazy over it. So when they went to Number of the Beast, I was a little shocked Paul Di'Anno wasn't with them anymore. But after I heard Bruce Dickinson, I was like, oh, they made a good choice. And so Bruce Dickinson became a huge vocal influence for me. And I really like his voice. And of course, Geoff Tate and David Bowie. I grew up listening to Bowie and Elvis. So for the lower register stuff, definitely all about Elvis and Bowie. For the higher register stuff, definitely Bruce Dickinson and Geoff Tate.
What about people like Judas Priest and Saxon and any of the other new wave of British heavy metal bands? Was any of them influenced
You know,
you?
it's funny. I loved Priest, obviously. I remember my first record was Point of Entry, and then just listening to Heading Out to the Highway, and I started to learn the whole record. And Halford, I mean, come on. I mean, he's a god,
The
dude.
metal god, yeah,
Yeah, he is just all hails to the
yeah.
guy, man. But I mean, especially now, he's in the 70s, and their new music is ridiculously awesome. So I'm pretty stoked on it. But so of course they were and it's funny you mentioned Saxon. That was when me and Glenn Rogers got together. That was the first thing that we had in common. We both loved Saxon. And so yeah, they were a big influence too. So yeah, that's for sure.
So your first record label was Intense Records. I mean, Bill Matoya produced that album, and we all know Bill's worked with all the Metal Blade bands. I mean,
Oh yeah.
some of the bands he worked with, like Hellstar and Omen and Fates Warner, they're like the bands I grew up listening to as in my
Oh
teens.
yeah.
But how did you hook up with Bill? I mean, I believe Gene Hogan had something to do with you getting a record deal. Am I right in saying that?
Well, no, Gene didn't really necessarily. You know, we signed with Intense because we didn't want to sign with a Christian label. And this is a funny story. I got to tell it. So we'd already been approached like 3 times by Frontline Records, and we said no every single time because we were warned by other bands on Frontline, don't sign with them. And so we just didn't want it, and we wanted to sign with a secular label. So we happened to meet this guy, Caesar Kalinowski, who was who had a secular distribution through Medusa and different things. So we felt comfortable signing with him. Well, so we signed our deal in 1988, and then he kept asking for demo after demo after demo, and we were recording demos. Finally, we just stopped. And I finally said, man, when are we going to go into the studio? We've been signed a year. So all of a sudden he calls me at my mom's house, says, hey, look, I'm in town, you know, because he lived in Chicago. And he goes, I'm in town. Let's meet for lunch. We met for lunch, and he just told me, good news and bad news. I sold the label. That's the bad news. I sold the record label. But the good news is the new label that owns you guys loves you guys and is going to take care of you and everything. I go, who's the new label? And he said, Frontline Records. I'm like, oh, man. So, and I said, why would you have done that? And he's like, well, they were really interested in Deliverance, and I threw in Vengeance and Sacred Warrior to boot. So that's kind of where that happened. And that was, I remember that was really Glenn's like decision for wanting to leave after when we were recording the first album. But you asked about how did Bill get involved? Well, Glenn had met Bill Matoya several times, and you know, through Gene, through different people, and we approached him. And Glenn asked him, you know, would you take a listen to us and see if you'd produce us? And he came to a rehearsal and said, yeah, I'll produce it, you know, because he liked what he heard. So it was kind of cool.
I'm very surprised Metal Blade didn't sign you up. Was that a label that approached you, or was it? Or were you too Christian for them? Was it? There's very much a stigma to Christian metal. People don't, yeah, which really pisses me off. It's like, look, they're a good band.
Yeah.
Take them for what they are, not what they believe in.
Yeah, you know, it's weird, man. Most of the secular labels wouldn't touch us because of the Christian overtones in the lyrics. And it was kind of a bummer because I'd known Brian Slagle pretty well, and so did Bill. In fact, I was asked to audition after our first album was done. Bill told me, hey, Flotsam is, I'm getting ready to do the new Flotsam record, and they heard your voice and they would like you to audition. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's an honor, but you know, Deliverance is my baby. I'm never going to leave. So, yeah, and then that, so nothing materialized after that. But I thought that was kind of cool that they heard my voice and liked it. So, but
Well,
I
that's
don't know why.
interesting.
I don't know why secular labels didn't really catch on. Our manager in '93 or '94 got us a proposed deal with Sony, and we went and met with the Sony folk. But boy, they were like, we have 100%, you know, creative control. We have 100% this, 100% that, and I'm like, yeah, I go, no, that doesn't work. I go, especially at that point, I started working with a new producer named Terry Taylor, and he was really encouraging me to follow my artistic side at that time. And his goal was to make me the David Bowie of metal, you know? So,
I agree. I agree. When I've heard your voice, I agree on that.
yeah, and I couldn't even think about signing a deal with them, man. It sucked. And but otherwise, I don't know why any of the early ones, because I mean, we sent Nuclear Blast, Metal Blade, Medusa, who was the other one? I think I even sent a demo to Cleopatra.
It's
And
funny.
yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned Nuclear Blast because they sound at Mortification, and those guys kind of sucked.
Yeah. Oh, I like them. They're all right.
They always had shitty productions though. Even with a major label like Nuclear Blast, they always had a really crappy production.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know why, but I know their drummer is amazing. I just absolutely love working with him. His name's Jason Sherlock, and boy, he played on one of our records. Hear What I Say, and oh my God, dude, he's a machine. He's frightening. It sounds so pinpoint accurate. You think it's a drum machine, but it's him. He's a brilliant musician.
I mean, the first album it's a brilliant album. There wasn't one bad song on that album. I still listen to it to this day. But do you remember what your favorite songs were off that first album? It must have received some really good reviews.
Our first album?
Yeah.
Oh man, it's so hard. For me, I think the standouts are going to always be the first song and the last song, Victory and Awake. And Victory, because man, that was the first song we tracked right when we walked into the studio. And Bill Matoyer just said, you know what, why don't you guys just start warming up? And we said, okay. And I went in the studio with Chris, Brian was there, and Bill didn't tell us, he hit record, and we just started playing. And when we finished, and Bill goes, I think that's the tape. And I go, you were recording? And he's like, yeah. He goes, come and listen to this. And we listened to it, and it was like, wow, that does sound good. So that was special. That was because this is our first time being in a real recording studio. You know, it was really cool. And Bill, just amazing to work with. I have to admit, I kind of bullied him a little because well, it wasn't our first time in a real recording studio. We had recorded a demo with called California Metal. It was a compilation record that came out in 1987, and we were working with John and Dino Elefante from Kansas.
Oh yeah.
And
they had a band called Mastodon, didn't they? They did a couple of albums for
yes,
Master. Yeah, good
yes.
albums.
Well, they really had their own way of doing things, and they didn't know what to think of us. You know, in fact, when we showed up and they said, play your songs, and we played Attack, we played Victory, we played Greeds of Death, and they were like, whoa, okay, you could use one of those songs, but you guys got to have something with melody too. So we ended up pulling out an oldie called A Space Called You, and we recorded those too. But man, they were so tight on, like, they wouldn't let me use my Mesa Boogie. I had to use their little Rock Band amp, and they would put all this monster reverb on the drums, and I mean, it was just, you know, they didn't know what to do with us because they were producing glam rock bands, right?
Yeah.
So by the time we went in, I was scared of working with producers. So when I told Bill, even though I knew his reputation, I told him, man, you know, we can't have any of that crap, man. I want it dry. I want it this. I want it that. You know, but he was a treasure to work with. He's a good guy, and we still talk to this day, which is awesome. Even though he only really worked on a few of Deliverance's records, he mixed Weapons, and he also mixed the Camelot and Smithereens album in 1995. So
I've noticed that a lot of your albums are being remastered and done in like gold discs of recent times. How do they differ, all these old albums, in sound compared to the originals? How do they sound different now?
I'd be honest with you, I like the way the old ones sound better. Because there's only so much. Like, it's weird when somebody says, "Oh, we're gonna remaster an album," because you remaster an album that's already been mastered. That doesn't make sense. And in other words, all the EQ and compression's already there, so you're gonna just add on to it, as opposed to if you got the original files, then you can really do a remaster. That's just to my audio ears, at least. But everything I've been hearing sounds pretty dang good, man. So I'm okay with it. People want it, and it's in demand. So I'm cool with it. In fact, I just got a box of CDs from Retroactive Records, they just re-released our Live in the Studio EP. So I thought that was cool. I'm gonna take a listen to that. Well, the thing is, I don't even have a CD player, man. So I gotta figure a way to listen to this.
I've got a CD player if you've got a spare copy.
I'll get you one, man.
Cheers, brother. But I mean, did your first album sell well before we talk about the second album?
Yeah. The first album did very, very well. We were actually, the Frontline was shocked. They didn't expect it to sell well. They were expecting it to sell between 10 and 15,000 units. And when it shipped over 30,000. So by the end of my time with Frontline in 95, it already had hit, close to 70 or 80,000 units. So that's pretty cool for over that lifespan, of the label. As far as all the redos and all this other stuff, I have no idea what those sell because it's not reported. Weapons did okay. Weapons did like, I think 50 or 60,000 out the gate. What a Joke shipped and then quickly shipped back. Not a lot of people didn't like that album. Stave Execution was the shocker. Nobody was expecting that one to do what it did.
That's the David Bowie vocals came in that album. Then that's when you started to notice a different change in your music.
Oh yeah, man. And that one, they were expecting to sell real poorly, but it ended up selling really well. It charted on Billboard. It was the first album for Deliverance to ever chart on Billboard. So it did well. And that one, I mean, I think it shipped close to 75 or 80,000 units. And then our next album was Learn. And that one, it didn't do as well as Stave, but it did well. And nobody knew what to think about that one. It was a moody album, real dark and slow paced.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Let all my Sabbath influence out as far as the guitar work. It was just a lot of fun. Plus, Manny Morales had come back, and he's an amazing Geezer Butler influenced bass player. And then what was the next rapper? River Disturbance. We signed with another label, and it's funny you mentioned Word because Word actually signed us.
Okay.
And put all this money into it, and then at the end, when it was all said and done, they shelved it. They said, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to sell this. We're not going to put it out. And so they ended up giving it to me. And then our production company at the time, Brainstorm, with Gene Eugene and Ojo Taylor, felt bad. So they put it out independently, and they put out like 30,000 units, and that was it. And that was a bummer because that's my favorite record still to this day out of the whole Deliverance repertoire. And then Camelot, we went back to Frontline, did the Camelot album. They were out of money. They couldn't market it. It sold horrible. And that was kind of all she wrote. And we took our hiatus for a number of years and then came back in about 5-6 years later. Yeah.
I mean, the second album, Weapons of Our Warfare, brilliant album as well. Great follow-up. There's some great ballads on there as well. What reminded me, the ballad on there reminded me of Metal Church, The Dark. Do you agree? Yeah. Do you agree?
Oh yeah, 100%. I agree. It was The Dark and Watch the Children Pray.
Yeah.
Kind of combined, smashed together,
Yeah.
So yeah, and yeah, people thought that sounded like Sanitarium. I'm like, no. I'm like, I don't know why people keep mentioning Metallica with us. It just didn't make sense.
I think it's just a guitar riffing, the way you strum the guitars. That's what people, I mean, like I say, your vocals are influenced by Geoff Tate, then you've got the guitar in of Metallica, but you've also got the slap of Overkill in there as well, no kind of bands.
Right.
Anthrax, maybe Anthrax as well.
Yeah, well, see, that's another band I never. I mean, I did really like a couple of their albums, but I didn't really. I'd never seen them live, never went to their shows or anything like that. So, I don't know. I just it's kind of strange. Everybody thought we were a total Anthrax influence because Joey sang, and I was a singer and he was a singer,
Yeah.
and the music was heavy and aggressive. Scott Ian is a true monster rhythm player. There's no question. And Charlie Benanti on drums. My God,
He's an underrated drummer. He's the big underrated drummer.
I think so because he's a beast, man. He's a
He
great
doesn't get
drummer.
the recognition of the big four drummers.
No, no, I mean Lombardo's still the most hailed. Um, although I know you've heard Gene Hogland and
Oh God,
that.
yeah. I seen him when he was in Dark Angel and Death back in the day.
Oh yeah, when he joined Death, I'll never forget. I was just like, I mean, he just blew me away, man. And that guy is another one that I don't think a lot of people pay as much. I think on the underground we paid attention to him a lot,
Mm.
but the mainstream seems like Lombardo gets all the hits, and then who was the name of the guy from the newer metal bands? Joey from Slipknot, I think was
Yeah,
his name.
yeah, the guy who died. Yeah, Joey Dodderson. Yeah.
Now he's a great drummer too, and different style, but he's pretty darn good. He had the quick feet. There's no question.
So, how do you compare Deliverance to Weapons of Our Warfare? How do you see them in terms of each of their albums? Like, do you think they're similar or do you think they're different from one another? A
Oh
progression,
no,
basically.
I think they're two different whole animals. I really liked uh I liked a lot of aspects of Weapons. I didn't like the production. I didn't like the tones. But I thought overall it was a really well balanced record. But the first album's, I mean, it's super special. It's special to all of us. It was special to Chris, and it was special to Brian, special to Glenn, special to me. It's just, I think what it was is we were playing all those songs live for 5 years. So it was nice to hear them recorded.
I mean,
Plus,
a lot of people say that the first albums are just demos, properly recorded, and it's the second album which becomes the official album.
yeah,
Is that true?
not for us. I mean, I looked at our first album as the first album. So I loved Weapons. I think that there's a lot that I would have fixed, like hindsight, but otherwise I think it's a cool album.
Right.
There's a lot, it's funny, there's a lot about What a Joke I like more than Weapons. But Weapons had an overall very polished current metal sound when it came out. I think it's proper to say it sounds like it came out in 1990.
I mean, the third album, What a Joke, was a great album, but production was very dry. What happened?
Yes.
What went wrong with that? Why was it so dry?
Me and George obviously weren't in the best places at that time. So we fought a lot, but I wanted it as dry as possible. I kind of wanted that SOD vibe. I thought
It had it on it as well. I was going to say it does sound a bit SOD-ish. The guitar riffs, the Scottian guitar riffs.
Oh God, yeah, all over the place. And it's funny, that's like the one and only time I got mentioned in Guitar Player magazine was for that album. Because they just said my wrist was on fire. And I thought that was a cool compliment, but it's like, God, what an embarrassing record. Because I mean, most of the joke songs kind of ruined it. I think if we took all those songs out and just put it out as an EP, it probably would have kicked ass. Don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, there's one song in particular, Silent Night. I used
Oh,
I used to take that song out at every Christmas time and get it played in the local rock bars, and all the people in the crowd were like, "What the fuck's this shit?" And then it kicks in and was like, it just kicks into this thrash version of Silent Night. It's just so brutal, but it starts off real mellow, as if it's like, "Oh my God, what are we listening to?"
that's great. I love it. I would have left that on there because it was cool. It was a different idea. We were toying between that and Little Drummer Boy, but I'm glad we did Silent Night because especially that when it gets into the big thing, I love it. It's super cool.
I mean, that's the when you first got George in the band from Recon. That first Recon album was awesome. To get George in the band,
Yeah.
I mean, Glenn left the band, got George in.
Yeah. He came in and George was aspiring to be a producer at the time. So bringing George in to produce Weapons was great. And then What a Joke, there was some suffering here and there, but otherwise I thought it was there was aspects of it I really liked, other aspects that I wish we wouldn't have done. But otherwise, there's some meaty songs on there. Pseudo-Intellectual, Prophet of Idiocy, Product of Society. Those are meaty songs, man.
It was kind of a thrash album. It's hardcore crossover music, wasn't it, that album? Because like you say, the SOD elements.
Yes. Yeah, very much meets hardcore. Yeah. That's a fun album.
I mean, the next album, State of Execution, that's when you crossed your vocals between Geoff Tate and David Bowie. But I know you're very good friends with Clayton from Savior Machine.
Yeah, my Stardust cousin.
Okay. Yeah. So you're very much influenced. You're very good friends with Clayton from Savior Machine, aren't you?
Oh yeah.
Is that when your darker element vocals came in? Was your influenced by their music as well?
No, not by Eric's music at all. You know, I was good friends with, I don't know if you're familiar with Scattered Few.
I know the band, yeah.
Yeah. So I was good friends with Ronald Domkus, his name is Alan Aguirre. And me and Alan were really, really close. And then we heard about this band. Well, first off, the Dead Giveaway, Savior Machine, that's the name of one of Bowie's songs. So we thought, okay, they're going to be like a Bowie type band. And then we heard Eric's voice and we were like both looking at each other like, yeah, okay. He's definitely got the vibe. So we all three became good friends because of our love of David Bowie. I mean, we're, go to an encyclopedia. You don't need to, just hang out with me, Eric, and Alan, and we'll tell you everything you need to know. We're Bowie fanatics, So when I met with Terry and Terry said, I'm going to make you the Bowie of metal. I'm like, okay. So we went in to do the record. And then I remember calling Eric and Alan. Alan actually was supposed to produce the vocals, but he'd had some scuff with our record label. So we had to get him out of there. And then we did the, whatchamacallit, I brought Eric in. Eric ended up doing backing vocals with me. So everybody thought that it was a big influence from those guys, but it really wasn't. My voice had started to change and I was kind of leaning towards that direction anyway. And the way I met Terry Taylor was I had already started working on a solo project and I asked him to produce it. And he said no, but he said he was interested in combining my solo stuff with the Deliverance sound. And I was like, I don't think that'll work. And he goes, trust me, it will. And thus it was born. Stay was a cool album, but you could tell it's very transitional.